Welcome to the second episode of the Intern podcast. I'm your host, Haley, and today with me we have our special guest, Karryanne. So, can you introduce yourself a little bit first?
Hi, my name is Karryanne. I'm currently working at Ravenscroft and Schmierer as a legal intern, and I'm an incoming second year at the LSE doing my degree in Anthropology and Law.
So, first question I really do want to ask is, why anthropology and law? So, we have a lot of LLB candidates, but not a lot of people with dual degrees or dual majors. So, what interested you in anthropology and law specifically?
Just for background, I used to go to a German school in Hong Kong, and for our IB diploma, we were offered the choice to take anthropology. So I actually took anthropology for 2 years before I went to uni, and I really thought it was an interesting subject because it felt like a mashup of all social sciences. Sometimes do a bit of sociology, sometimes politics, I guess sometimes even law or other subjects like geography and history. There's really an intersection with anthropology for everything you learn. In terms of law, I think the question that interested me about the two was, why do we have law? So I guess it's a pretty big question to ask. And I think by just studying law, you really just learn about all the rules. You don't really get to find out why the law exists, why certain types of the law exists. So I think the intersection between the two was a pretty important question to me when I first started.
What are some interesting examples of this intersection that you've explored or that you've seen in lectures or at LSE or maybe in your day-to-day life?
So in my course titled An Introduction to Anthropology, I got to learn about the refugee crisis in Europe. I actually wrote an essay on it as well as part of my final grade. The way we taught the subject was that we first watched some movies about the crisis, we got to read some articles, and then we had a discussion. So I guess you get to learn about how EU law works, how different countries work together to solve the crisis or to, just kind of destroy the crisis even more. It's pretty interesting because it does relate to law quite a bit. I did find myself getting to apply some of the knowledge that I had during property law or introduction to legal systems. Next year I'm going to be taking a module called Political and Legal Anthropology. So I'll get to read books like Foucault's Birth and Death of the Prison and the Panopticon to learn about, I guess, how prisons work, why people are governed, how police systems are in place. So I think that does relate to law quite a bit as well.
Great, thank you so much. So, what does your day in life as an intern look like at Ravenscroft and Schmierer, and what have you been doing so far?
So obviously I come into the office at around 9:15. I sit down. Sometimes I have time to go to 7-Eleven to get a cup of tea or a coffee. I sit down and then I have a to-do list of what I have to do today and what I've done. So I think it's a pretty nice thing to have because I get to cross off what I've done. I get to track what I have to do for each person, and I get to prioritize my tasks. I'd say compared to the other interns, or as far as I know, my tasks are more stretched out. So normally I have to write articles or I have to file bundles, and that normally takes up a whole day because if I'm filing bundles, I have to read through all of them. I have to check the pages are correct, and then sometimes I have to get back to Anna, who's our litigation partner. She's basically in charge of the whole thing about bundles because you have to use them in court. Sometimes if I'm working with other interns, we either work together to file bundles, we get to film podcast episodes. Sometimes we also get to film videos about life as an intern. And I'd say most importantly, or something that I've found to be the most interesting, would be writing articles. Right now I'm working on an article for self-identification orders in a cryptocurrency scam. I've also written an article about my life as an intern.
So thank you for doing the life. So I know recently that you've been working on a cryptocurrency case with Anna, as you previously mentioned, and you had a brief court experience. What has that experience taught you, or was anything about that court experience surprising to you, given that, the day-to-day, realities of our legal system is very different to what maybe people expect in law school?
So I went to court in the morning. The purpose of the court visit was to get, I think it was to get a leave for identifying the people involved in the case, and also asking for the banks to identify the information of the account holders, because this wasn't provided to us previously, and we do need a warrant for the bank to be willing to provide that. So it was actually pretty quick. We went into the court, we all stood up, bowed to the judge, and then the judge was like, "Are you sure you're going to file this injunction to all of the banks?" And then our barrister was like, "Yeah," and it was basically done. So it was a pretty simple experience. It was a lot quicker than I expected because we weren't really working on the case. We were kind of just going through the procedural necessities for asking for a grant. I'd say this kind of did change my perspective on how courts worked and how the law worked in Hong Kong and just kind of in general. Normally, your impression of courts would be to, you show up, there's a lot of barristers, there's a lot of lawyers, there's the defendants, and they sit behind the barred little room at the back. But this really wasn't it, especially in a lot of litigation cases. You do have to go through a lot of different procedural steps. You have to look at the evidence together in court. If you're working on a normal case, you have to watch the videos together. There's cross-examination, which is the most typical type of a court experience, where the barrister asks the plaintiff or the defendant questions. For us, we didn't have that because, again, we weren't working on the case. We were just asking for information. So I think it's important also that we have these experiences because, it's pretty important because you do have to be prepared for the courts. Even though it's such a simple affair for 5 minutes, we still had to file around 20 bundles for every defendant. We had to deliver it to 20 different addresses all over Hong Kong. So I think it really matters the work you put in as a lawyer.
Okay, so a little bit of a shift in that regard. Hong Kong's legal system is known for being one of the most paper-heavy legal systems in Asia, and as I'm sure you were previously talking about, the various bundles and injunctions. Just for some context for our listeners, each bundle is about, I'd say, the size of maybe a bottle of water, but think of that as just the thickness of all the papers to take up for one single bundle. So imagine 10 of those bundles delivered to 10 different people at 10 different addresses. I know that you also had some experience delivering these injunctions. So what do you think these sort of, I guess, this use of paper and your experience delivering these bundles, what is your opinion on, I guess, the way that the Hong Kong legal system is set up?
I think obviously that's a very, bureaucratic thing. You have to go through all this stuff. You do have to prove that you've sent them. So if we deliver the bundles, we have to take a photo. We have to send it back to the lawyers, who then file a document to the court. They have to sign and approve that they've made sure these bundles were delivered. So that's a lot of work in itself. The last time we filed a bundle, there were 2 bundles. One was 400 pages and the next one was 600 pages. In total there were 1,000 pages. We had to use 3 ring files to deliver them. For the defendants, we basically just sent them in, we put them at their addresses in a paper bag, an envelope. Actually, given that it's a cryptocurrency case, obviously a lot of the defendants just gave wrong addresses, or they just made them up. So if there was, say, we went to a tower where the address given to us was on the 7th floor, but then actually that building would only have 5 floors, so then obviously we cannot deliver that. So we can only put it in front. Last time I actually coincidentally walked past the same building when I was going home at night. The bundles were still there after a few days. So I think it's pretty obvious that no one really picked them up, but it's still something you have to do just in case they do happen to be there and they do take the service. It's a pretty important step because you want to make sure all the parties involved, even if they're the defendants, to know what they're being accused of, what they have to do, so they can get their legal representatives to, obviously work on the case. It's a pretty important thing, I guess, for all the parties involved. It really makes sure justice is served for everyone in the case. So I think it does have its purpose of existence, but maybe the legal system could consider using greener options.
Yeah, so on that note, this case is also very special because it's one of the first cases in Hong Kong, or one of the first few cases that is using a form of alternative service, which is NFT service. So can we talk a little bit about that sort of rise of alternative service and what you think, I guess, Hong Kong could, do more, or like what's your experience with alternative service so far, since it's so new and quite a relatively unexplored field?
Okay, so just a bit of background information. Service is when an individual is formally notified of proceedings against them. So basically what we talked about, delivering bundles. Personal service is when you have to leave a copy of the document with the person to be served. So whenever you have court cases, you have to send them bundles, you have to send them summons and all that stuff. An NFT, as you probably know, is something on the blockchain that is special and cannot be replicated. So an NFT is really like, you can think of it as a special link to something. It's a non-fungible token to represent something digital. So when you send people a service document as an NFT, you basically send them a special kind of like website and address to them where the summons or the bundles are encrypted inside. So they still have the opportunity to know what the case is about, even though we don't know who they are and we don't know where they're living. So the way we sent them the NFT was because we have their email address during the crypto scam because it was provided to our client. So then we took leave from the court and the court let us send in the service as an NFT. So this is known as alternate service because sometimes personal service can't work. This is one of the first cases in Hong Kong to do this through NFT, and I think it would be a really nice step forward in the legal industry because, as you talked about before, the legal industry isn't really the best at keeping up with the new technology. So I think having this is also really important because obviously, while the legal industry is behind in terms of tech, the people doing scams are not. So we do have to combat that.
Great, thank you so much. I also know that apart from the NFT service, you're also looking at writing an article for Anna about self-identification orders. So maybe could you give us some context about that, or like how that article is going and how that fits into your daily routine as an intern?
Okay, so the self-identification order was something I started working on after the court case. It's also something new introduced to us after the NFT service that I just talked about. So as we all know, global cybercrime is a pretty serious issue, especially following, COVID-19 and everyone's working from home. People are they're more accepting to using the internet. So then obviously there's a lot of scams, whether this be like crypto or people, randomly cold texting you on WhatsApp. So normally these methods of communications it lets people be anonymous. So you don't know who's sending the messages, even though that person may have, another person as their profile picture or another name. So a self-identification order is an order issued by courts for unknown defendants to identify themselves and provide an address of service for court documents. So it's kind of similar to what we talked about just now, but this time people have to tell the courts who they are and where they live. So obviously this does sound a bit counterintuitive. So so people choose to be anonymous. So obviously they're not just gonna do this because of a court order. But this is actually acknowledged by the High Court of England that the purpose of the order is not really to get their information instantly, but it's to acknowledge that the defendant might disobey and not comply, but it will ultimately be possible for us to identify them and who they are. So this order, by hook or by crook, will bring the people unknown into the light. So it's really a very important thing to have if you're working with online scams and people who you don't know who they are.
Yeah, so this is all really interesting because it's almost a completely new field of law that has arisen, like, or that has arose due to, the rise of NFT, cryptocurrency, but also just online and anonymity that being online gives you. So that's a whole new area of law that I think is really interesting for any potential new, solicitors or barristers, and so that's a great part to explore. And here at Ravenscroft and Schmierer, we have quite a bit of experience with cryptocurrency and also just fintech law, and a litigation partner, Anna, is especially experienced in that. So apart from these more technical aspects of law that we've been discussing, what do you think your experience at Ravenscroft and Schmierer has been like? What's your opinion on company culture, and how do you think your time here has been?
I think Ravenscroft and Schmierer is a really nice, like a firm. It's not the most international, it's not the biggest of them all, but the people are really friendly. So even the partners, my fellow interns, all the trainee solicitors, they're all very willing to help when I have questions. I think something that surprised me the most was actually how friendly all the interns are. So even with you, Haley, I know I can reach out to people at the firm whenever I have any questions, and especially given that we have an open door policy here, so I'm not really afraid to ask questions even when I don't know how to do stuff. Last week, actually, I did file Erica's bundles completely wrong, so I filed them according to date instead of according to case, but she didn't make a big deal out of that, and she did give me more time to do it. So I think my major takeaway is that mistakes are inevitable, and as long as you're willing to learn, you're willing to take responsibility for what you've done, ultimately, I guess, people are really friendly and they do want you to learn, so yeah.
Great, thank you so much. So that concludes this episode of the Intern podcast. Please tune in for our next episode where we have new guests, and I hope you guys all have a great day.